Welcome back. This is Friday lunchtime. I want to return to party and parliamentary politics now. And the ANC's parliamentary work in the past few months has focused mainly on the coronavirus pandemic. I guess that's to be expected. And government has been widely criticised for dragging its feet in securing the vaccine, despite now planning to roll out 1 million doses by the end of this month. I want to take a look at how the party has fared in Parliament in 2020. Parliamentary reporter Lindsay Dentlinger is with me, and I'm also hoping in a moment or two to be joined by political commentator Asanda Ngoasheng. But first of all, Lindsay, good afternoon to you. How would you summarise then the year that was in Parliament? And maybe let's set this in the modern idiom, if we can, what the President is going to say tonight in this important January the 8th statement. He's got to set a tone.
He definitely has to, Jeremy, and as we know, last year when he made this statement, this pandemic had not yet fully hit our shores, and so he couldn't have foreseen what was to come in terms of setting the tone for his party. But when it did hit our shores, and it was evident that Parliament had to get going, they were criticised for being rather slow out of the blocks, not only to deal with the technicalities of continuing the business of Parliament during a lockdown, but also in terms of the decision-making that was being taken. The opposition parties really criticised the ANC for giving the executive too much power, as we know, with that establishment of that command council that didn't sit well with many opposition parties and is still the subject of a court case. But once they did get going, Jeremy, it was the feeling that many of those decisions were already being taken by the executive and that Parliament was merely rubber stamping those decisions. And so the matter of the pandemic and COVID-19 really became a subject rather of debate in Parliament and a really after the fact, after decisions had been taken, the Minister of Health or Social Services or whoever it was coming to explain to Parliament decisions that many felt Parliament should have been taking the lead in making those decisions. But more from of getting business off the ground. We know the ANC Chief Whip, Pemi Majidina, hardly left the parliamentary precinct. She was working behind the scenes all the time. And it took Parliament a little while to get the technicalities sorted out. But once they got going, Jeremy, it was really a long parliamentary year. They extended their business and a lot really was done, not only in relation to the COVID-19 pandemic, but we shouldn't forget that they also had the business of needing to deal with other laws, other matters that deal with other contentious issues in the country aside from the pandemic.
All right, Lindsay Dentlinger, parliamentary reporter, stand by. I'll come back to you in just a moment. Joined now by political commentator Asanda Ngoasheng. Asanda, good afternoon to you and welcome. Let's just look at tonight, if we can, first of all, 7 o'clock, the January the 8th statement. What sort of compass direction, in your opinion, does the President have to set?
Thank you so much for having me. It sounds like from what the ANC is saying, they're trying to, or they want to give some hope to the unemployed and everybody who's been devastated by the COVID pandemic. And I think that, you know, the President needs to set a very strong message, particularly around the economy and what their recovery plan is, because with, people suspecting that we're going to see yet another lockdown before the end of this year, and the fact that the vaccine is only going to come for health care workers in the beginning of this year and maybe later in the year for everybody else, it's going to be quite difficult to figure out how people are going to survive this year if we have a second lockdown.
It's important that he focuses on the economy and obviously the strategy, Asanda, as far as COVID-19 is concerned. But the head of the ANC's organising committee, Nomvula Mokonyane, saying yesterday the party would also use this occasion, and I quote, to reaffirm our collective commitment to the resolutions of the 54th National Conference. Having said that, though, one of those resolutions was about the suspension of ANC members suspected of corruption and malfeasance. He is not, by all accounts, going to reference that at all tonight. He will say nothing about the beleaguered Secretary-General Ace Makashule. I spoke to a political commentator earlier today who said that's the right thing to do as far as the party is concerned. It's a clever, strategic and tactical move. But my argument back to her was that the longer this perpetuates, the more pressure it puts the party under. What's your thinking?
I think that Ace Magashule should have been dealt with by now. I think that he should at the very least be suspended, and so should every other political party member or at least leader who has been involved or at least allegedly involved in corruption, because that's what sets the tone. Because the people at the bottom, i.e. ANC members at the bottom who are involved in corruption, are not going to take this stuff seriously if, one of the top leaders, the Secretary General, is embroiled in corruption and hasn't been dealt with. Nomvula Makonyane herself is embroiled in corruption and hasn't been dealt with. Zandile, and so many more. That, it makes this message that the president has been giving us about the ANC really being serious about corruption, it makes it an empty promise. And I think that people are really tired, and particularly in this case where corruption cost us the ability to provide PPE. And in some instances, one can even argue that corruption has cost us getting in early on the vaccine, because we were still scrambling, trying to look for the money, even though we initially had quite a big chunk of money that we could have used for vaccinations, for PPE, and for so many of the challenges that we saw as a result of not having money in this pandemic.
Lindsay Dentlinger, parliamentary reporter, let me come back to you now. Essentially what happens tonight, 7 o'clock, it's a virtual address that the President gives. It kicks off the political year 2021. All of this moves towards Parliament later on in February. What then are the key issues that the ruling party is going to have to grapple with in Parliament in the year ahead? I assume it will be dominated by two things, the economy and the pandemic.
Indeed, Jeremy, it does set the tone, and in just over a month's time, the President will be delivering his State of the Nation address. So what he says tonight would really feed into that. As Asanda's also pointed out, the economic recovery of the country. We know that that was a main topic on the parliamentary agenda towards the end of last year. But Jeremy, there are also, besides the pandemic, and I should point out that Parliament has technically already kicked off its work yesterday, called an emergency meeting on that COVID-19 vaccine, and had the health minister account to the committee on what's being done. But there are also other issues that have a little bit been hanging in abeyance because the pandemic has really dominated the work of Parliament. And if I could just single out a few, Jeremy, there's this lingering matter of the public protector. By the end of February, that panel that's been given extended time to consider whether or not Parliament should institute an inquiry into her fitness to hold office. That should really be coming to a head. That matter's been dragging on now for at least 3 years. And then another matter entering its third year, and which we might hear the President say something about tonight, and that is land reform and expropriation. Again, that matter of amending the Constitution was stalled last year due to the lockdown and the inability to be able to complete those public hearings in actual venues. They were eventually completed virtually, but that has been a contentious issue hanging about. And of course, Jeremy, I should also point out these bills on gender-based violence. It's been 18 months since the President made bold promises to activists that something will be done. Those bills were introduced to Parliament before the end of the year, but now we need to see how much longer it's going to take for them to become law.
Asanda, just very quickly in conclusion, do you agree with Lindsay's long list of priorities, or is there more to it in terms of the ANC and the priorities that it needs to lead in Parliament?
Yeah, I agree in the main in terms of what she's highlighted, but I also want to add that there's a couple of bills that need to be passed quite urgently because they're going to have an impact on the municipal election. One of them is around the information protection of people's information, within the elections register. We also having some laws around public funding, which also need to go through. And I think that one of the things that the President is really going to have to focus on this year is signing, bills into law quite quickly, because he's had a very bad track record where at some stage he's even took him 6 months to put in a bill and sign it into law after it had already been passed by Parliament. And that is something that's really unacceptable in this era where we need government to be functioning and to moving quite fast, and that has an impact on the people that these specific bills and these specific laws have an impact on. And I can imagine it's quite frustrating to be a social justice activist or an organization that has been fighting for a long time to have a specific bill become law, only to find that once it's been passed, the president takes their time. And I think the other thing I want to highlight is that the president is really going to be quite careful in terms of what the government does in terms of once things are put into law, how quickly they have a turnaround time, because there's also been a trend where, particularly with this president, they've had to have the Constitutional Court tell them what needs to be done and basically sort of yank them through the courts in order for already existing laws to be implemented. And that's something that they're going to have to look out for. And I think that South Africans really deserve to have already agreed on bills become law as soon as possible.
It is an exhausting list of priorities, and we'll get the sense of direction tonight at 7 o'clock when the President delivers the annual January the 8th statement. I want to thank Asanda Ngoasheng, political commentator, along with our parliamentary reporter, Lindsay Dentlinger. Now, the